Okay, this is a video about understanding mixed numbers and improper fractions. Warning before we get started, the videos for chapter 2 that I make are going to have bad math jokes in them. Like this. Okay, so this part should be some basic fractions review. What exactly is a fraction? So, fraction, you're used to one number on top, one number on the bottom, and a line between them. The top number is the numerator, and the numerator, one thing you want to remember is it tells us how many pieces we have. Bottom number is the denominator. The denominator is different. It tells us what type of pieces or how big the pieces are. So this fraction that I drew, 2/3, this would represent something that's divided up into 3 pieces. And you only have 2 of those pieces. So the denominator here tells me that we're dealing with thirds, but the numerator here tells me that we have 2 pieces out of our 3/3. Okay, so here are some examples using pizza. So if you look at the first example, this is half of a pizza. The numerator here is 1 because we only have 1 piece left, even though it's a big piece. The denominator is 2 because we started off with 2 pieces and the pizza is divided up into 2 pieces. Over here, 2/4, it's still the same amount of pizza, but it's split up differently, so the fraction looks different, but it represents the same amount. We have 2 pieces left out of 4 pieces that we started with. And same amount of pizza still over here, 4/8, but it just looks different because it's split up differently. The pizza is split into 8 pieces, so the denominator is 8. There are 4 left, so the numerator is 4. So all these fractions that we've seen so far, they all have one thing in common. The numerator on top is a smaller number than the denominator. So every fraction that I've showed so far is actually less than 1 whole. When we deal with mixed numbers and improper fractions, they are actually more than 1. So this is an example from the textbook that shows some fractions that are actually more than 1 whole. So if you look at A, these 2 circles, we have 1 whole circle, and then we have a circle that has a fraction in it. So remember what numerator and denominator mean. The top number, numerator, is how many pieces. So that's easy. We can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the numerator for part A would be 7. The bottom number, denominator, tells us what type of fraction it is. So each whole piece here is divided up into fourths or quarters. So for this, the denominator is 4. So this is improper fraction. It's called an improper fraction because we're not used to seeing a larger numerator than the denominator. So it seems kind of improper. But there's another way to express this fraction. It's the exact same amount, but just another way we write it. We might write this as saying we have 1 whole shape, and we have 3/4 of a shape as well. So this would be 1 3/4. This is the mixed number version because we're mixing whole numbers with fractions. So 7/4 or 1 3/4 are the exact same amount, just written in different ways. So I'm going to stop for a few seconds, and I want you to maybe just pause your video and try to do B. Just because it helps to do an example on your own So pause the video, take whatever time you need, write down the answer to B, and then in a few seconds I'll do it on the screen. Okay, you should be unpausing now. So for B, hopefully what you wrote down is the mixed number version. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 whole shapes there. And then the last shape, there are 2 pieces out of 5 pieces. Each shape is split up into 5s. If I want to write that as a improper fraction, I have to count how many pieces there are total. So there are 5, 10, 15, 20, 21, 22. 22 pieces total, and the denominator is the same. It's still fifths. Every one of those shapes is split up into fifths. So try C and D on your own, and if you're stuck on those, ask about them in class. So hopefully by the end of this slide, though, you know basically the difference between a mixed number and an improper fraction. The next thing we're going to do is figure out how we can go convert from one to the other. Okay, so let's start with this improper fraction. I want to turn this improper fraction into a mixed number. So what I need to be thinking about is how many whole numbers do we have, and what fraction would we have left over. One way to think about this is what would a whole number look like for this fraction? So the type of fraction we're talking about is halves. So think about something split into 2 halves. And the whole shape would mean I have both halves. So a whole number in this fraction is 2 halves, which could be written like that. So how many whole numbers do I have? Think about it this way. I have 2 halves, I have 2 more halves, 2 more halves, 2 more halves, 2 more halves. I'm going to run out of space. So altogether that's 10 halves. So I have 5 whole numbers, and I have, in addition to that, 1 half left over. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 whole numbers plus a half. So the mixed number would be 5 and a half. Okay, let's try that again. The stylus doesn't work that well. 5 and a half. Okay, so that's one way to think about the mixed number. Drawings can really help you as well. So I could do this by, remember the top number is how many pieces, and the bottom number is what type of fraction we have. So I could use something like pattern blocks to figure this out. So if you're using pattern blocks to represent fractions, the red pieces that are this shape are good ones to represent a half. And when we get a full hexagon, that represents a whole. So this would be 2 halves, and I need to just keep drawing pattern blocks and putting them together until I have 11 pieces on the table. So okay, instead of drawing pattern blocks for 5 minutes and making you watch, I'm just going to magically bring in some pattern blocks. Okay, I'm going to start my pattern block, and we need 11 pieces, so I'm just going to duplicate it. Okay, so now I have 11 pieces. I'm going to arrange them into wholes. So each one of these is a half. I want to see how many whole hexagon shapes I can make. Okay, I sped up time and arranged my pattern blocks. I still have 11 pieces as shown by my numerator, and you can count them. And those 11 pieces can be arranged into 5 whole shapes, with each shape divided into 2 pieces, which my denominator tells me, and there's 1 half shape left over. So if you're going between improper fractions and mixed numbers and you're stuck, definitely grab some pattern blocks from me, and it's one way to model these questions out so you can kind of see what's going on. Okay, the flip side of this is going from a mixed number to an improper fraction. And again, there's a couple different ways to think about this. So think about what the different parts of this fraction represent. 2 and 1/3. So the denominator here tells me that whatever sort of fraction I'm using, it's going to be in thirds. So every piece in this fraction is divided up into 3. The numerator here tells me I have 1/3 of a piece. So I have just one little third left over somewhere. And the whole number tells me that I also have 2 whole shapes. So let's just pick pizzas for this one because they're easy to draw. So let's just draw this out and see what it would look like. So there's one whole pizza, and it's divided up into thirds, but we have all the pieces still. Nobody's eaten any pieces yet. And there's another whole pizza, also divided up into thirds. And then we have another pizza, but we only have 1/3 left, and the other 2 imaginary thirds have been eaten already. So to write this in an improper fraction, just think about what the different numbers mean. So let me write my fraction line here. The number that goes on top, the numerator, is going to be how many pieces do we have. So we can just count from our diagram. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces. The denominator stays the same. It's just telling us what type of fraction we're dealing with. And in this case, it's thirds. So 2 and 1/3 can also be written as 7/3. They look different, but they represent the same amount. Okay, there's a math way to do this as well, because you might not always want to sit there drawing pizzas for every question, especially if you're dealing with a larger mixed number that's hard to draw. So we're going to try this just by calculating. So think about this number. I have 8 as a whole number. That means I have 8 of something, and each one of those 8 has 5 pieces, and all those pieces are still intact because we still have the whole number. So we have 8 items split up into 5 pieces each. So how many pieces do we have? What would we have to do here to find out how many pieces? We would multiply the denominator here by how many whole numbers we have. And that's going to tell me how many pieces I have just from that part of the number. So that's 8 times 5, 40. So I have 40 pieces, but I have a little bit more because I also have 3/5. So I have those 3 additional pieces. So I have to add 3. So in total, in this fraction, I have 43 pieces. But I can't just leave it like that. I gotta put this into the form of an improper fraction. So the denominator is what type of fraction are we dealing with? And in this example, we're dealing with fifths. So the improper fraction version of 8 3/5 is 43 fifths. If you want to do that really quickly, just think, okay, start with the whole number, and then multiply by the denominator, and then add the numerator. And that tells you the number that goes on top, the new numerator, and the denominator stays the same. Okay, lots of students struggle with fractions just because they forget what the two different numbers mean. So when you're working on questions in class, just remember numerator tells us how many pieces, and denominator tells us what kind of fraction it is, or how big the pieces are. And since it's the end of the video, here is one more bad fractions joke. Tell me after you've watched the video if you get the joke or not.